The water hit me like a wall of glass. 1 second I was standing on the dock behind my own lake house, watching the last strip of October light dissolve into the mountains. The next second I was under, the cold so absolute it stopped every thought in my head except one. Marcus had just put his hands on my back and shoved. I had been 62 years old for exactly 11 days. The cold wasn't like cold. It was a physical force that locked my lungs the moment the surface closed over me. I'd grown up in Oregon, spent summers on this very lake as a boy. But nothing prepares a man for October water at this depth. My boots filled immediately. My jacket, the heavy canvas one I wore to walk the property at dusk, became an anchor. I couldn't see anything below me, couldn't see anything above me except a faint silver shimmer where the dock lights caught the surface. I want to tell you I was calm. I wasn't. I clawed upward with everything I had, and when my face broke the surface, I pulled one breath before a wave from a passing boat pushed me back under. I heard, somewhere above, the creak of dock planks, footsteps walking away. Not running, walking. That detail would matter later. A man who runs away from the dock after pushing someone into 48-degree water is a man in a panic. A man who walks away is a man who was certain. I found one of the dock pilings with my left hand. The barnacles cut my palm open, and I didn't feel it until the next morning. I held on until I could breathe, then worked myself hand over hand to the ladder at the far end, the one my father had bolted to the dock 60 years ago, when this was still a fishing cabin, and not the property my company had turned into something worth fighting over. I lay on the dock planks for a long time. The wood was cold. The sky above me was enormous and dark and full of stars, and I stared up at it and felt something settle in my chest that wasn't fear and wasn't grief. I had experienced both of those things in my life. This was something quieter. It was clarity. I got up. I wrung out my jacket. I walked back to the house. Marcus and my daughter were in the kitchen. My daughter was at the counter with a glass of wine. Marcus was at the island with his phone. When I walked through the back door, dripping, my daughter's face went white. Marcus looked up and I watched something move behind his eyes before he arranged his expression into concern. "What happened?" he said. "Slipped," I said. "Off the dock." The way he nodded, slow, almost satisfied. "You've got to be more careful out there. It's dark." My daughter set her wine glass down. She didn't come toward me. I noticed that. I had noticed a great many things about my daughter in the last year, and each one had settled into a ledger I kept somewhere behind my sternum. "I'm going to shower," I said. "Then I'm going to bed." I went upstairs. I stripped off my clothes. I stood under hot water for 20 minutes and thought about the last 18 months with the kind of precision I used when I was evaluating a construction bid, line by line. No sentiment, just the numbers. My name is Robert Callahan. I built Callahan Development Group from a two-man framing crew I started at 24 into a regional development company with 40 employees and 14 active projects. I had spent 4 decades on job sites, in county permit offices, in banks arguing for financing on properties that other developers had walked away from. My wife Patricia died 8 years ago from pancreatic cancer. She was 57. I mention this because everything that came after my daughter's marriage, my willingness to trust, my failure to see, has its roots in that grief. My daughter Diane met Marcus Holt 3 years after her mother died. I liked him at first. That's the honest thing to say. He was polished in a way that Patricia and I had never been, more comfortable in a restaurant than on a job site, but he was attentive to Diane, and that mattered to me more than it should have. When they married and Marcus mentioned he had a background in finance, I offered him a position managing the company's accounts receivable and vendor contracts. I told myself it was because he was qualified. The truth was, I was lonely in the company, and I thought it would keep Diane close. For the first year, everything appeared fine. Marcus was competent, sometimes brilliant, and he had a way of presenting information that made you feel the problem was already half solved before he finished talking. He earned the team's respect quickly. He earned mine. The first irregularity appeared in a vendor payment summary 14 months ago. A landscaping subcontractor on our Ridgeline Commons project had been paid twice for the same invoice, $4,200. I flagged it and mentioned it to Marcus, and he apologized and said it was a processing error and the overpayment would be recovered. I let it go. 3 months later, a materials supplier called my cell phone directly. Something that hadn't happened in years since I'd stepped back from day-to-day operations because they hadn't received payment on a $60,000 lumber delivery. Our records showed the payment had been made. Their records showed it had not. Marcus told me it was a banking delay and resolved it within a week. I let that go too. What I didn't let go was the feeling. I had spent 40 years in a business where the difference between profit and ruin was sometimes a single line item in a subcontractor agreement. I knew the texture of honest confusion, and I knew the texture of something else. In August, I hired an outside accountant, a woman named Sandra Reeves who had worked fraud cases for the state before she went private. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell Diane. I told Sandra I needed a quiet review of the last 2 years of vendor payments, and I needed it done outside the company's system. She called me in late September with a preliminary finding. The number she gave me, sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a hardware store, made me grip the steering wheel with both hands and stare at the windshield for a full minute before I could speak. $280,000. Redirected across 11 transactions over 22 months through a shell vendor Marcus had created with a name similar enough to one of our legitimate suppliers that it would slide past a casual review. The shell had a P.O. box in Portland and a bank account Marcus controlled. I asked Sandra how certain she was. She said she was very certain. I thanked her. I told her to keep going. I sat in that parking lot for another 10 minutes and thought about my daughter. I thought about whether she knew. I thought about the glass of wine on the counter the night I came in from the lake, the way she hadn't moved toward me. I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to hold it yet. The night at the dock came 3 weeks after Sandra's preliminary call. In those 3 weeks, I had been careful to behave exactly as I always had, coming and going, reviewing reports, signing documents Marcus put in front of me. I noticed Marcus watching me sometimes with that flat, measuring quality his eyes got when he thought no one was looking. I think he suspected I had noticed something. I think he decided the dock was the solution. What Marcus did not know was that I had installed security cameras on this property 18 months ago after a break-in at the boat shed. There were 4 of them. One covered the back of the house and the dock. The morning after the dock, I drove to Portland and sat down with an attorney named Gerald Park. I had worked with Gerald on 2 commercial transactions years ago, and I trusted him completely. I laid out everything: Sandra's preliminary report, the shell vendor, the dock. I told him I wanted to know every legal option available to me, and I wanted to know what moving too quickly might cost. Gerald listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I trusted him. Then he asked me one question. He said, "Does your daughter have any legal ownership position in the company?" I told him no. The company was wholly mine. Marcus had a compensation package, but no equity. Gerald nodded and made a note and said, "Then let's talk about how to do this correctly." I want to explain what correctly meant, because I think people who haven't been in a situation like this imagine there's a moment where you walk into a room and say something decisive and everything resolves. That's not how it works. Correctly meant weeks. It meant Gerald coordinating with Sandra, Sandra completing her full audit, a forensic accountant named Dale confirming her findings independently, Gerald consulting with a former federal prosecutor who now advised on financial crimes, and me continuing to go to that house and sit across the dinner table from Marcus Holt while all of it happened. Those dinners were the hardest part. Not because of Marcus, because of Diane. My daughter is 41 years old. I watched her learn to ride a bicycle in the driveway of our first house. I watched her give a eulogy for her mother that made 200 people cry, including me. I had believed, with the confidence of a man who has known someone since before they could speak, that I knew who she was. The evening I finally asked her directly was a Sunday in mid-November. Marcus was at a project meeting. Diane and I were alone in the kitchen the way we used to be when she was young and I'd come home from a job site. I sat across from her at the table, and I said her name, and when she looked up I said, "I need you to tell me what you know." She knew what I meant. I could see it. The way the color shifted in her face. The slight compression of her lips before she found her composure. She said, "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Okay." That was all I said. But I think we both understood that word had closed something between us. The door, on the version of events where this ended differently. 3 days later, Gerald filed the civil complaint. The following morning, before Marcus arrived at the office, I met with my operations manager and my 2 senior project managers, and I told them what had been discovered. I walked Marcus's access card and system credentials into the IT manager's office at 8:15 and had them deactivated. When Marcus arrived at 9, the building's front desk called me, and I went down. He was standing in the lobby in his coat, his briefcase in his hand, and I watched him understand from the expressions of the 2 people at the desk that something had changed. Then he saw me. "Your access has been suspended pending a legal matter," I said. "Gerald Park will be in contact." Marcus looked at me the way a man looks at something he thought he had solved. "Robert, don't," I said. I wasn't angry when I said it. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't running on rage. I had used all my anger up on those November evenings, alone, and what remained was just steadiness. There's nothing to discuss here. Your attorney and my attorney will handle what comes next. He left. I went back upstairs. I sat at my desk and looked out at the city for a few minutes, and then I opened the project files I hadn't looked at in months because I had trusted Marcus to manage them, and I started working. The civil complaint was the beginning. The criminal referral came 4 weeks later, after Gerald and Sandra presented the full audit documentation to the county district attorney's office. Dale's independent forensic accounting had confirmed not just the $280,000 in redirected payments, but an additional $62,000 in falsified expense reimbursements. Marcus had submitted directly under his own name over a period of 14 months. The total was $342,000. The DA's office moved faster than Gerald had anticipated. I think the doc helped. The security camera footage was clear. Marcus's face in profile, the deliberate placement of both hands, the unhurried walk back to the house. Gerald's former prosecutor colleague had reviewed it and said the word deliberate 8 times in 20 minutes. Attempted murder is a specific legal category, and the footage made the argument without much assistance. Marcus was arrested on a Thursday morning in January. I was at the office when it happened, and I didn't watch the news coverage. I had a site walk scheduled at our Clearwater project that afternoon, and I drove out and put on a hard hat and walked the foundation forms with the crew foreman and talked about the concrete pour timeline. Diane called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. What I want to tell you about my daughter is not easy to say, but it's the part of this that is most true. The civil discovery process produced emails, many of them, between Marcus and Diane, going back nearly a year before the doc. In those emails, Diane discussed the audit trail Marcus was creating, the timeline, what she called the next step. She had not pushed me into the water, but she had known, in a way that emails document with terrible precision, that something was coming. Gerald presented me with the discovery material in his office on a Monday afternoon. When I was done reading, he poured 2 glasses of water, and we sat quietly for a moment. He said, "How do you want to proceed?" I thought about Patricia, not as an indulgence, just as an honest reference point. I thought about what she would have said sitting in this office reading what I had just read. I thought about her particular kind of directness, the way she had always been more clear-eyed about people than I was. I said, "Is there anything in here that changes the criminal case against Marcus?" Gerald said it strengthened it. I said, "Then I want to revise my estate documents, and I want to make sure the civil judgment, when it comes, is structured to reach any marital assets." Gerald nodded. He made notes. He didn't editorialize. That's the other reason I trust him. Marcus Holt pled guilty to felony theft by deception and 1 count of assault with intent to commit serious physical injury. The attempted murder charge was reduced in the plea agreement, which frustrated me, but Gerald explained the practical reality of what juries do with financial crime defendants who are otherwise articulate and professionally credentialed, and I accepted his counsel. Marcus received 4 years at the Oregon Department of Corrections with the possibility of release at 28 months. The civil judgment was entered simultaneously for the full $342,000 plus legal costs. The judgment reached everything. The house they had bought in the West Hills using funds Gerald's team had traced to the Shell account, a brokerage account in Marcus's name, a joint account he and Diane shared. Diane was not criminally charged, a decision that was the DA's. Not mine, but the civil judgment didn't require a criminal conviction to attach to marital assets. My daughter moved into a rented apartment in Northeast Portland. She retained an attorney and sent me a formal letter through him requesting a meeting. I asked Gerald to respond that I would be willing to meet at some point in the future, but that I needed time. That was true. I still need time. I don't know yet what shape any kind of relationship with my daughter might take, or whether it will be possible. I think about Patricia, and I think she would tell me not to close the door permanently. But I also think she would tell me I'm allowed to need time. What I can tell you about the months since is this. I am sleeping well, which I hadn't done in over a year. The company is running well. I brought in a new financial operations director, a woman named Karen who had 20 years at a Portland commercial bank before she went private sector, and she has rebuilt our internal controls in a way that I should have done years ago. Sandra Reeves is on a quarterly retainer. That is a decision I should have made before I was 62, and I've made it now. I go to the lake house on weekends when the weather permits. I have repaired the dock. The camera is still there, and 3 more like it that a security contractor installed in January. In the mornings I walk the property in the same canvas jacket, which I dried out and kept because I am not the kind of man who throws away a jacket that still has use in it. There is a moment I come back to sometimes, standing at the railing in the early light with coffee, looking out at the water. The lake in November is one color, and the lake in March is another, and both of them are beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with what happened here. That's something I want to hold on to, the ability to look at the place where the worst thing happened and still see the thing that made you love it to begin with. Someone asked me recently, a man I know from the industry, who heard parts of this story through the professional community. He asked me what I would do differently. I thought about the question seriously before I answered it. I said I would have looked more carefully. Earlier. Not at the numbers. You can always find someone to explain numbers to your satisfaction if you want to. I would have looked at the small things. The way Marcus walked away from the dock. There were other moments like that over 18 months. Small betrayals of character I catalogued but declined to read. A man who is used to building things has a tendency to believe that enough investment and patience will produce results. That's useful in construction. It's not always useful in people. I said I would have trusted my discomfort instead of explaining it away. The other thing I would have done differently has nothing to do with Marcus Holt. It has to do with Patricia. After she died, I spent a long time trying to hold everything together by myself because I thought that was what strength looked like. I brought Marcus into the company because I was lonely in it. I gave my daughter's husband authority over my life's work because I wanted them close and I didn't know how else to ask for that. Those are the real vulnerabilities. Not the shell vendor. Not the signature on a vendor agreement. The human stuff that sits underneath the documents. I'm not sorry I loved my daughter without condition or that I wanted to believe in the life she was building. I'm not sorry I trusted. I would rather be a man who trusted badly than a man who never trusted at all. But I'm also not the man I was when Marcus walked through my front door, more willing to be impressed by presentation than I should have been, more willing to let things go. That man is gone. I am 63 years old now. The company is mine, clear and whole. The lake is mine. The dock is mine. The mornings are mine. I got up. I dusted myself off. And I am still here.